Okay, what is wrong with you again? Oh, I spelled it wrong. Okay, here is a mistake. So make sure you're typing your title correctly. There was a mistake there since I didn't type the file name correctly. And so here we have hello world. Okay, great. So after this, we want to move on to the variables in JavaScript. And as you may know, JavaScript is a dynamically typed language. That means you don't have to specify a type when you name a variable in JavaScript. So for example, let's say we want to have a variable such as the Battlesnake or your snake. Let's say you want to have a variable for the name. So in order to declare a variable, the one way you could do it is using let. So write the let keyword, and then you have the title of your variable, which in this case could be, say, snake name. In this case, let's call it snake. Okay. So first semicolon, and once you have that, you'll be able to console log it by putting the variable into this bracket here. Console log can print the values of variables. So once you do that, here's a tip. In your terminal, if you don't, every time we have to run this JavaScript file, we'll probably have to type node in the title of the file. You don't have to do that every time, as you can really just click the up arrow key, and it should just copy your last command, and you'll be able to run it. So here we have it running, and we'll see that it has printed out snake, which is the value of the variable. So there's one way of initializing a variable in JavaScript. The other way is using const. So const is another way, and let's call it snake. So const is a way of initializing your variable on variables you don't want the value to change. So in your program, sometimes you might have values that you don't want to change, and you don't want other people to change if you're working in groups. So for example, maybe you have a certain algorithm, certain value or a password, and you don't want other people to change it, and you don't want any changes to happen to it. That's when consts are pretty helpful. And so here, if we were to log the snake ID, and then we were to run it again, we'll see that the value of the snake ID over here is printed. So that's great. In JavaScript, there's actually another third way, which is to use var. And var is kind of similar to let. So you could write var, let's just call it snake color, and then you can set it to, let's just say white. So here is another way of writing it, and if you print it out as well, snake color, and let's run it, you'll see that white has appeared on the console as well. So, that's pretty good. And you might be wondering, well, let and var are pretty similar. So what is the real difference between them? Well, the real difference is that let and const have scope and var doesn't. And what that specifically means is that if I were to declare a let and a const within a certain scope, like an if statement or a for statement, I cannot use that outside of that scope. But a var doesn't have that problem. So in order to demonstrate, a simple example, let's just do an if statement. Let's say if snake, to make sure this if statement will run, let's check if it's equal to snake. And then here we can declare a variable called, let's say, test equal to 0. Let's say it's equal to 0. And then we can log it here. So once we log test, let's try printing this. And we'll see that here we have the test logged, which is 0 right here. This is where it's being logged. However, if we were to try and log test outside, to make it more clear, this is the curly braces for the if statement. This is the scope of the if statement, and this is where I declare the variable. If I were to print this again, we'll see that it's giving us an error. It's saying that test, here, just to make it bigger, we'll say here that test is not defined, and that's because you're trying to call it outside of this if scope. So that's what let does, and it's the same thing if you were trying to declare it as const. So if you were to try running that again, it has the same error. That's because it's within the scope. However, if you were to do it via a var, like that, you'll see that it prints properly. Well, it prints twice. It prints here, and then it printed here. So var doesn't really have that problem, which in hindsight may not be the best because certain times you don't want certain variables to be available after the scope. So there's that. That's a choice you can have. And so in JavaScript, another thing that needs to be noted, since it's not typed, JavaScript sometimes can have very wonky behavior that you might need to be aware of. Like, for example, we know that snake name here is snake. We know that, let's have this be let. Snake ID is 1001. If I were to declare a new variable, which is like an addition of snake name plus snake ID, and I were to print it, get rid of this. So if I were to print this, it's going to print snake 1001. And that's because JavaScript is really wonky when it comes to adding stuff. And so when you add a string and this number, it becomes a string. In other case, if we were to add, let's say we're not adding a string and instead we're adding a Boolean, let's say true, this now becomes 1002. And that's because JavaScript treats truth as a 1, which is a true, and treats false as a 0. So when you add these two, this becomes 1, it adds the snake ID, and so it becomes 1002. So this is just a part of the wonky behavior JavaScript has when you come to like adding variable. It doesn't have like those type constraints. So just be careful when you're like testing variables when you're actually doing your program, because stuff like this can like give you some unexpected bugs. So another thing that needs to be known for JavaScript is that it doesn't really have like specific number variables. Other languages like Java have like integers, like floats. They don't have that. In JavaScript, everything is just a number variable. So if you were to do type of for test, let's say it's a number, and it's the same even if I were to say that snake ID is 1001 point. Oh, no. What's going on here? Oh, that's test. It should be snake. My bad. Just to demonstrate, it should be type of snake ID. It's going to say the number. So that's the thing with variables in JavaScript. Other thing in JavaScript is how it treats the equality operator. And I have a note here. So in JavaScript, let's say you want to do an if loop and you want to do a Boolean expression. Let's say I should have to. Let's say I wanted to do a expression and I wanted to check if snake name is equal to snake. In other languages, and really all of them, we would just use the equals, which is the equality operator. And let's say I want to check if it's equal to snake. And of course, just console log true. See, it prints out true. However, JavaScript has a weird thing with their equals. So if I were to say something like this, and I were to check here whether or not it's equal to this number, there are different types of values. As you can see, this is a string and this is a int. If you were to execute this, you would expect this to not print out true because it should be the case. But when you execute it, here it's true. And that's because in JavaScript, this operator is not a strict equality, which means that if you want it, if the value is the same, even if they don't have the same type, it'll evaluate to true, which is probably not what you want in most cases. So I suggest you guys to always use the triple equals, which is the strict equality. It will check for the type, and so it will not print out true in this case. So after we cover loops, we're just covering objects. Objects are essentially JavaScript's way of having multiple attributes. They're a representation of something with multiple kind of sets of properties. So in order to declare object, to just clear like that, you could say let's say we want to declare snake, we could just declare it like this. So this right here is just you saying that you want an object, and you can add to it later. But if you want to initialize it with certain values, you can do so by doing them in key value pairs. For example, in order to add this property to the snake, you would need to have the property name that you want it to be. For example, the snake, you need to have a colon, then you'd have the actual value itself. So this is a key value pair. Afterwards, maybe we want to have like ID and perhaps color. So something like this. And when you have something like this, you'll be able to just print. For example, just print the object itself out. And when you do that, it'll just print the object out. Or you can just print specific parts of the object you want. And there's two different types of ways you can do that. One is just using dot notation, and the other is bracket notation. So using dot notation, you can simply write snake dot name. So one of the properties you want to get, and then if you run this, it bring out snake, which is a value here. You can also do so via bracket notation, which is like this. For example, if you do that, will you do the same results, which is snake right here. All right, okay. So you might be wondering what the real difference between dot notation and bracket notation really is. And bracket notation is preferred if you want to use a variable to retrieve your property. So for example, if we have something like, let's set this equal to name. Let's say we don't know what this could be, but we know it's within this object, and we wanted to get this value from the object. And this will not work if you were to use dot notation. So if we were to do snake.test, it's going to return undefined because it can't find the test property within snake. However, if you were to do bracket notation, so let's say test, and you'll be able to get the snake. So this is when really depends on what situation you have and which one you prefer. And there's also adding stuff to objects. So if you want to add stuff to objects, there's again two different types, the bracket and the dot. You can just say snake, let's say you want to say length equal 50. You can just do this and then print it. It's going to have the length, the new length right here. Or in the other case with the brackets, you can delete this and instead write along the list important that this is a string. So, and again, it'll yield the same results. So which one you use is really dependent on what situation you have and what you need at that moment. Another thing with objects, another thing is looping through objects. If you want to loop through objects, you can't use the traditional for loop using the let I equals 0 and whatnot. If you want to loop through objects, you would need to use the for in. So in this case, you would need to have a for loop or for syntax, and then you have a variable here, which you can have it be x, or in this case, I guess I could have it be t, in, and then the object, which is snake. We'll have curly braces, and then we'll be able to console log the key. So you do this, you'll see that it's printed out the name, the ID, the color, the length, which is all the different properties we have here. I'm going to do this. So this is how you would get the key, which is the properties here. If you want to get the values specifically of the object, you would just write that. You would just think of it as how you would do it like array or something, write it like that. And so when you print this, it will now print the actual values you've assigned to those properties. So snake, 101, white, 50. So that's really all for objects. And so next we have functions. And so functions in JavaScript are basically just blocks of code you can reuse or to get, and they essentially return values. So in JavaScript, there's function declaration and function expression. So the first would be a declaration. So if you want to write a function, first write function on the editor, and then write the title. This is since this is a declaration, you would need to assign title to your function. So in this case, let's say you wanted to calculate the area of your snake. I guess it has a length and a width. So calc area, and then put a bracket after it. And then within this bracket are parameters. So essentially values you give to the function to help it figure out, I guess, what they should calculate from. So in this case, if we wanted to calculate area, we might be using stuff like length and width. So those are the two parameters you might need. And then we follow it with a curly bracket, and then we would use the return keyword. So return here just essentially is what this will return when you call this function. So here we can return length times width. You can do it where you, if you have more calculations, you can do it where you're like, let x equals length times width, and then you can return x. But the method I just showed before works as well. So you can have something be like this. So this is a function declaration right here. There's also another way of writing function, which is via expression. So instead of just writing this here, we can assign it to a variable. In most cases, we have it via const. So because it doesn't change, so we have a const. Let's call it calc area 2. And then we have it equal to function. And then we have, again, the syntax for this is pretty similar to the declaration. And we can even have the same thing. So these two, this is the difference between the declaration and the expression. So if we want to, let's say, use the function, if with a declaration, if we wanted to use this function, we would just call it like this. So we just write calc area bracket, and then we input the values you want it to take. So in this case, I want to say that length is 10 and that width is 5, like this. So this is called, and this will return this value right here. But currently I haven't assigned it to anything, so I can just assign it right now to a variable, and then I can console log this variable. So just like that. And when you run it, you'll see that we have the area here 50, as that's the area between length of 10 and width of 5. So if we want to use the function expression here, we would just, instead of calling this part, we would call this part the variable itself. So we'll call calc area 2, we call it, assign the variables, and then run it again, and it prints out the same thing. So in JavaScript, there's also another way of writing this, which is to use arrow functions. So instead of having this function length width, we can just get rid of this and put an arrow right here. And this will do the exact same thing. 50. And another important thing that needs to be noted about the function is that within a declaration, you can call this before it's even been declared here. So I can technically say, to copy and paste this before I even write calc area part. So we can see that this function has been declared here, but I'm calling it here. We'll see that it's working just fine. You're allowed to call a function declaration before it's been here, but you cannot do that with the expression, as it will give you an error. Calc area 2. So on functions. Next, we have the arrays. And specifically, I want to talk about the new array methods that have been implemented in ES6, the map, filter, and reduce. So let's this. In JavaScript, if you want to declare an array, it's the same as before. So let test r equal to, you can't just declare it like this and then add to it later. Or you can initialize with some values, in which I'm just going to put series of numbers like this. And so if you were to print it, it would just print this array. And in JavaScript, it doesn't, again, like I said, it doesn't have type restrictions. So you can have an array with multiple different types of values, like have a string, number, boolean, and this will work perfectly fine because they don't really have that constriction. Yeah, so have this. So this can be useful in certain situations if you need. And specifically with arrays, I want to talk about, like I said before, the array methods. You can apply a series of methods to your arrays so that you can make your code look cleaner and not have to rely on for loops. So the first I want to talk about is the filter. Let's say I have an array of elements here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and I wanted to have the elements of this array, but only if the values are divisible by 2. And normally you might have to go through a for loop. You have to check each value and then you have to add it to the array. It can be kind of exhaustive and kind of hard to read. So in JavaScript, there is a way where you can have your target array. So target array, and then you can simply have your original array call a function called filter. And what it will do, it's a function that will take in something. So here we can have num. So I'll just explain this right here after typing it. So what this function here does is it takes in this value. This value here is each of these elements inside the array. And it will check if this part is true. So check if this number is divisible by 2, which just uses the modulo. And then once it is, it will put it into the target array. So if you were to run this, you'll see that it prints out 2 and 4, which fits this requirement right here. So that's the filter. Next, we also have the map. The map method is another array method. And here, instead of filter, we'll write map. And then here, it works the same. All these methods kind of work the same. We'll write num. This is an arrow function. And then so here, what map does is it applies a function to every one of the elements in your array. So for example, I want to have this array, all the elements, but I want all the elements to be their exponent, they're squared. So here I will write num. By the way, exponent. Sorry for explaining. This is exponent per year. So if we were to run this, we'll see that the new array now has 1, 4, 9, 16, which is the square of these numbers. So that's what map does. It puts a function over all the elements in the array. The last one we have is reduce. Reduce is kind of used when you want to have one value based on all the elements within your original array. So let's say if I wanted to have the sum of all the array in here and I didn't want to use a for loop, I could just use reduce method. And then here I'll have 2 elements, total and num. And then I will write total plus num. So let's run this. Here, it will print me the value of 10 because that would be the sum of all these different digits. And the sum of that would obviously be 10. And here, this is the element that they are looping over, all this element here. And this is the actual accumulator, all the stuff that is essentially being accumulated from this statement. So in here, total would be 10. And so, all right, okay. So that is kind of it for the arrays. And if there's still time, I guess I could talk about the spread and the knowledge assignments. All right, okay. I guess I could talk about the spread. The spread is kind of a way to spread your arrays into a new target. So let's say I have these 2 arrays and I want to add them to one array. You could use spread like this. So it's just 3 dots. Test R, and then test R2. You have this. If you run it, it will have this part. Oh, I forgot to. Yes, make sure you have the 3 dots for both of them. And when you do, it'll have everything concatenated into one as it's spread like that and added. And next, we also have the knowledge operator. And really, I should talk about I'll talk about along with the ternary operator. In JavaScript, there is such a thing as a ternary operator. And what it will do is it's kind of like a simplified if statement, but it's kind of one line. It's easier to do. So let's say you wanted to check if snake name was equal to, let's change this back to, let's say we have this variable and you wanted to check whether or not it's equal to white. We can have something like this where we say snake name to white. And so normally you would have this be in an if statement, and then it will run whatever is in the curly braces. But here you can just have a ternary, basically question mark. And after this question mark, it will take two statements separated by a colon. So first would say console log true. Next would be console log false. And so this will take in two different statements after, separated by a colon. This will execute if this part is true, and this will execute if this part is false. So if you run it, it'll say it's true because this statement is true. And of course, if we change to something else, it'll say it's false. So that's the ternary operator. Next, we also have the nullish operator, the nullish equals, I should say. So in JavaScript, there is a way, the nullish equals, where you can say let, if we assign a variable, let snake speed. And we just assign it. We can just do something. We can do nothing with this variable and just leave it like that. We can test whether or not it's null. We can check whether or not it's equal to null, and if it is, we can say that it's all right. Anyways, I think, yeah, I apologize. I seem to have that wrong. So I think this should be it for the workshop. I think, do you guys have any questions you want to ask? All right. Do note that in your Notion, that within the Battlesnake official, there is a starter boilerplate code that you should get off the GitHub that will just, so here we have just some rough code with your Battlesnake and its X movements. So you should have this and then use this to build on top of your snake. So the link for this is in the Notion, and if you want to get a copy of it, just go to code and download the zip. So yeah. So I guess if you guys don't have any questions, you're free to go to the next. I think the next one is the backend, I believe, talking about Node, I think. So if you guys are interested in that, can go. Otherwise, I'm down here, so you're free to stay or I guess go to your next workshops. The other room right now, I think Forrest is doing the Python, but the next one I think is the backend, which talks about like HTTP requests and stuff. So I think that's should be here. Yeah, someone should here or yeah, it should be either here or the other room, but I'm not sure which one they sit in. Yeah, the workshop after this is the web servers and the HTTP, and it should be. Yeah.
All done?
Yeah, all done.
All right, I'm done your broadcast.